Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
Tuning in to the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily Ferrier, here to bring you some uplifting stories in these trying times. Our first story today, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved the first drug to treat peanut allergies in children on Friday, following Advisory Comments Committee vote of approval. The drug can be used for children between 4 and 17 years old, and it's designed to minimize the incidence and severity of a children's allergic reaction to reaction in peanuts. So the small amount of exposure can be harmful to children with this allergy, and children that are left attempting to avoid exposure to peanuts and avoid reactions. Though that will continue to be necessary with the drug, the risk of reaction will be lessened, says Dr. Peter Marks, director of the FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, in a statement. When used in conjunction with peanut avoidance, the drug provides an FDA-approved treatment option to help reduce the risk of these allergic reactions in children with a peanut allergy. So, for those of you that don't know, more than 2.5% of all American children are allergic to peanuts, according to the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. It's one of the most common food allergies in the country. For those allergic, exposure to peanuts can result in symptoms like cramping, indigestion, hives, swelling, and even fainting or dizziness. Now, this is something that hits home for me. Personally, my favorite thing in the world is a peanut butter sandwich, and I can't even imagine not being able to eat that. I think that's so sad. The diagnosis of a food allergy generally has a considerable impact on patients. Not that it results in dietary restrictions. Not only that, it often is associated with a constant threat scenario. And given the risk of sudden allergic reactions, including life-threatening anaphylaxis, it's essential for patients to receive training on how to deal with an emergency situation and make them correct their decision regarding the use of emergency situations and make the correct decision regarding the use of emergency medications. Severe allergic reactions occur only rarely if patients are well informed. However, the fear of these allergic reactions can significantly impair their quality of life. In recent years, numerous studies have been carried out on this quality of life in food allergy and anaphylaxis patients. These studies provide insight into patient behavior in everyday life, and more importantly, by means of targeted and specific counseling, they also make it possible to reduce adverse effects on the quality of life and improve avoidance behavior and compliance in terms of the requisite emergency measures. So in one of these first studies of quality of life affected children in 2003, so quite a while ago, it concluded that the quality of life of children with a peanut allergy is significantly lower than patients with type 1 diabetes. The most significant impairment was the persistent fear of an adverse reaction, which was perceived as not calculable. So this prevailing fear could be measured in subsequent studies and affects not only allergic children and adolescents, but also their parents. So the reduction of the quality of life actually does depend on age. A working group in Switzerland recently showed that older children experience a greater quality of life reduction than the younger children. So this may be because they perceive it as a burden, and they feel like they're taking away something from their parents. And in some cases, their parents perceive the use of public transportation, going to parties, traveling as life-threatening, thus diminishing the quality of life. The presence of a food allergy also affects school performance. On average, allergic children are more likely to have school absences and less likely to be in full-time employment later on in life than their non-allergic peers. A very recent U.S. study investigated the bullying behavior towards food-allergic children, and this study showed that allergic children are affected significantly more than the control population. It's assumed that they're easy prey, and they use their allergy against them. However, with this new treatment that the FDA has just approved of, this quality of life could improve with persons with allergies significantly. So how this treatment works is that they expose children to a controlled dosage of this peanut protein until they've reached a maintenance level. So 2/3 of children were able to eat the equivalent of 2 peanuts with no allergic symptoms after the months-long treatment. Patients may be required to take therapy for 6 months or longer, and about 9% of the children dosed with the drug had to stop the treatment because their allergic reactions were too severe. So it doesn't work with every single person with it, but 9% of children with the drug, that's, fairly low. So that's very good. They will warn you, though, that anaphylaxis can occur any time with the drug, but patients are at a higher risk during their initial dose escalation and the first dose of each updosing level, both administered under supervision in a healthcare setting with providers there to monitor reactions. If a patient tolerates the first dose of an increased level, the patient can continue daily at home. It comes in a powder that's made from actual peanuts, and it should be mixed with something that's semi-solid, something like a yogurt or an applesauce. Providers will also have to counsel patients on their caregivers to give an injectable drug with them that they can readily use at all times. So this is a huge advancement in the medical community. I know a lot of people with pretty severe peanut allergies that I feel their life has been affected because of this. So it's really fantastic that there could be a possibility of this being completely cured and completely alleviated, and not have to worry about this drug affecting them in the future. So if you do suffer from a peanut allergy and you would like to try the drug, I believe it's going to be available to the public fairly soon, so that is very, very exciting. Of course, you need to be doing this in a controlled environment. It needs to be approved by a doctor and everything. But I think that this could really improve the quality of life that we were discussing from those couple of articles in people with peanut allergies. So this is huge. This is very exciting. Yeah, huge for the medical community, huge for the FDA, huge for Americans being able to have some peanuts and Cracker Jacks at the baseball game, having a peanut butter sandwich at lunch, having Reese's peanut butter cups, and all of those amazing treats that they wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. And even if they can't have them, even if they're too allergic for that, just to be able to be around them without worrying and that constant fear of having an allergic reaction. So this could be big. This could be really exciting. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about another incredible advancement in the medical community. There has been a bit of a breakthrough in Montreal, Canada, talking about cervical cancer possibly being completely eliminated within 20 years. So that's very exciting. We're going to talk about that when we come back from the break.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about some incredible advancements in the medical community in terms of peanuts and peanut allergies, making it easier for people with peanut allergies to exist in this peanut-riddled world. So that was very exciting. And now we're going a little bit up north to our brothers from the north in Montreal. And we're going to talk about some advancements in the cervical cancer medical research areas. So this is in Montreal. Cervical cancer could be eliminated within 20 years of Canada, and then within a century worldwide. So by 2120, they expect, according to 2 international studies in Quebec, which researchers have participated in. It would be a great victory for women's health. Massive, massive, massive. However, the objectives are conditional on a 90% vaccination for young girls against the human papillomavirus, HPV, and good cervical cancer screening rates and adequate access to treatment. So this is a conditional study, but I do think that it's a very positive and exciting study, so we're still going to sort of dive into this a little bit. So the researchers' results, led by Professor Marc Brizin of the Faculty of Medicine at the Université Laval and the CHU Research Center at Quebec Université Laval, were published in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet. So the team used projections based on mathematical models, calculating the effect of the targets advocated by the World Health Organization, or WHO for short. More specifically, they predict that by 2030, so that's just 10 years from now, 2030, 90% of young girls will be vaccinated against the human papillomavirus. That 70% of women will be subjected to 1 or 2 cervical cancer screening tests during their life, and that 90% of women with precancerous lesions or cervical cancer will have access to adequate treatment. So this prediction is just for 10 years from now, so that's pretty incredible. In Canada, vaccination coverage is currently around 80%, and girls and boys are vaccinated in the 4th year of elementary school. As immunization coverage is good in the country, women also have easy access to screening tests. Researchers predict that cervical cancer could be more easily eliminated here than in other countries. So that's in Canada, of course. They estimate that in North America, however, so all of us, the virtual disappearance of this disease could occur as easily as 2040. So that's very close. It's 20 years from now. It's the first time that this study has estimated a number of cases, cervical cancer that could be prevented in the time that disease could be eliminated. in the WHO if the WHO strategy is applied. The incidence of cancer is projected to decrease by 97% within a century. That is very thrilling, which would prevent 72 million cancer cases worldwide. 72 million cases of cancer. That's unbelievable. That's an unbelievable advancement in medical science. This is according to Melanie Drolet, co-author of the study. She says that these targets are realistic. The epidemiologist at the CHU Research Center in Quebec Université Laval indicates that the countries where HPV vaccine has been introduced, the vaccine coverage rates of 90% have been achieved. So this has already made a huge feat, but sometimes the access to screening tests and treatment is not there. She believes that it will therefore require political and financial commitment from these countries to achieve the targets. The work was to establish the strategy for the elimination of cervical cancer. Will be submitted to the adoption of the World Health Assembly next May 2021. So they do say that the vaccination is a must in this feat, but could lead to an 89.4% reduction to cervical cancer cases over the next century. It does affect many, many people, so this would be very important to get. In Canada, people get vaccinated at age 11 to 12, maybe even as early as 9. However, you may actually receive the vaccination until about age 45, so there is a significant window to be able to take this. Back to Professor Brizin at the Université Laval. They argue that low to middle income countries could avert an estimated 61 million cases of cervical cancer up to 2120. And getting screened for this cancer once in a lifetime could reduce the risk by 96.7%. Just one screening could do that. They also predict that it is possible to achieve full elimination completely between 2055 and 2102. So that is it. Just a couple of screenings and you could potentially completely eliminate that. So that's pretty incredible. Professor Brizin says, for the first time, we've estimated how many cases of cervical cancer could be averted if this strategy is rolled out when elimination might occur. Our results suggest that elimination of cervical cancer will be highly necessary to achieve both vaccination coverage and a high uptake of screening and treatment, especially in countries with the highest burden of the disease. So he does call for international commitment. It must be something that everybody does together. We could lower the mortality rate by 34.2% by 2030. This would mean averting about 400,000 deaths in just 10 years. And like I said earlier, could lead to a 97.9% lower mortality rate by 2120. So that is pretty incredible news from Montreal, Quebec. And it's spread as well to Geneva, Switzerland, as well, where the World Health Assembly will be held, where they discuss this in May. So that's pretty incredible. Huge victory for women's health. Huge advancement for that. However, he does caution that the only way it could be achieved is with considerable international financial and political commitment in order to scale up prevention and treatment. So with cooperation and everyone kind of being in on this commitment to women's health and changing the outcome of this incredibly awful cancer, we could potentially eliminate this form of cancer in the world. So that is a pretty incredible advancement from Montreal. When we come back, we're going to talk about music in prison. That's right. So we're going to talk about music in prison by a world-class violinist. And we're going to talk about that in a few different ways when we return from the break.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back from the break. So before we left, we were talking about some huge advancements in the medical community, especially with cancer research and peanut allergies. And now we're going to go over to a couple of different prisons where they are implementing some sort of musical advancements to increase inmate morale. So specifically, this case also comes from the north of America, from Abbotsford, BC, where a classical violinist, Gordon Kremer, has performed for some inmates. So he's been a professional violinist for 50 years, but this past week was the first time that he played his 379-year-old Amati violin for prisoners. The Pacific Institution in Abbotsford, BC is a federal penitentiary housing up to 400 inmates serving time for everything from property crimes to murder. About a quarter of them signed up to hear the preludes to A Lost Time by Meskizela Weinberg and a Canción by John Sebastian Bach, played by the Latvian master violinist. The concert was a gift to prisoners from the Looking at the Stars Foundation, a Toronto-based charitable organization that delivers classical music to those without access to it in traditional venues. And I would say that this is a pretty non-traditional venue as far as they go. As inmates filed in from their maximum and medium security units, each one was searched by prison guards and a sniffer dog before they entered the gymnasium filled with rows of plastic chairs. I think music is something to give warmth to everybody in trouble. In prison, or not in prison, says 72-year-old Kremer. Another inmate, who doesn't wish to share his last name, his name is Robert, says that he came to hear the violin because where it comes from, and it's used to accompany square dancers, and that would be a different experience. As well, he said he's heard of Kremer in the past. He really wants to see a classical music program for the prison as well. For the lower functioning inmates, it'd be good for them for therapy. They come out of their bubble. They just come out of their shell. Robert had previously missed a performance by a classical pianist in the institution in April of 2019, and he says that the inmates kept talking later about how much they enjoyed the concert, so he had to get out for this one. He says he believes that prisoners will be able to talk about how they feel through music. At the end of the concert, the inmates were given a chance to ask Kremer questions. They wanted to know about other musicians, like Vivaldi, and how old was Kremer when he first started to play the violin, and who played his violin before he played it, because it was made in 1641. But mostly, they wanted to thank him for coming and playing for him one of the most complicated pieces of music. I have to say that in some ways, They were more attentive and more enthusiastic to some concert audiences, says Kremer. I was happy to have been here. He says if he's ever invited to play at this prison again, he would say yes immediately. The inmates actually gave him about several rousing standing ovations for his concert. So, in another Toronto-based news, another Canadian-based news in prisons, in musical and prisons, the Looking in Stars Foundation was created by Dmitry Kaganovich, who came to Canada as a refugee from Lithuania in 1983 and went on to build a successful career in information technology. As a lover of classical music, he created the foundation as a way to give back to Canada. Music, he says, is a way for inmates to retain dignity, to be treated like human beings. He knows that they would have committed serious crimes and been in jail. And he says it's well deserved, but prison is also where recovery begins. I completely agree with that. Why would we be putting people in prison if we didn't have some hope, for them to reform and change the ways that they have been in the past? So this is another program that has some concerts for prisoners to attend, and at every concert, Konovich stands in the door to the gymnasium, and he shakes hands with each inmate coming into the room. He makes a personal connection with every single inmate that comes in. And since the foundation was established back in 2015, 5 years ago, he's hosted 37 concerts in 15 different Canadian prisons. The Pacific Institution concert was presented in partnership with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, so some really incredible performers from Canada. The audience was spellbound for an hour, President and CEO Angela Elster says. Music, she says, has an incredible power to heal and connect. To that end, an initiative in the works between the VSO and Corrections Canada called Play It Again will help inmates come back to the instruments that they played in the past or would like to play. So not only does this initiative have a concert for the inmates so they can get in touch with their musical roots yet again, but it actually will continue to grow the musical abilities or potential musical abilities within the prisoners that are incarcerated in various correctional facilities in Canada. So these couple of stories that I found, I thought were really hopeful and really beautiful. I've talked about musicophilia by Oliver Sacks on this podcast before, and just the idea of music as therapy and music as healing and unlocking parts of the brain and parts of the psyche that may have been inhibited in the past, and the idea of reform and prisons being used as correctional facilities, and righting the wrongs in the past. I think that this is a beautiful, beautiful example of how to do that and how to move forward together in the future. People really connect with music. People connect on a much deeper level with music, like going to a bar or a musical venue and listening to music. You really feel like you're at one with the people around you. And I just really love that these orchestras and these specific musicians have been trying to give that experience to people that would otherwise not get the experience. Like you can't go to a concert if you are in prison. And these prisoners from all walks of life, from all crime and experience and such, sharing this thing together and trying to heal together and move on together, I thought was really beautiful. So we're actually going to talk about this a little bit more when we come back. This time we're going to talk about a women's prison and specifically about one of these music programs having helped a prisoner to move forward in her future. So we're going to talk about that and a couple of other little music stories in prisons when we get back from the break.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
From the break. So when we left off, we were talking about some music being used to help reform in prison. And now we're going to talk about how this helped a specific prisoner. So this is very exciting to hear it in practice. So after serving a 14-year sentence for murder, no one would have expected Sarah Jane Kaufman to go anywhere near Highland Mountain Correctional Center in Eagle River, Alaska, once she was released. But every Saturday, she makes the 16-kilometer drive with viola in tow for orchestra practice at prison, just north of Anchorage. Kaufman, a founding member of the Women's String Orchestra at the prison in 2003, will debut as a citizen member when the 2 annual holiday concerts are held on Saturday. Acclaimed cellist Zool Bailey will also perform with the women. It probably seems weird to other people, said Kaufman, who was released in February of last year. A lot of people I love and care about are here. My friends. It's almost a little comforting to go see them. But I'm also very happy to leave when it's time to go. So this concert is also a milestone for another founding member, cellist Dana Hillbush, convicted for the murder of her common-law husband in Ketchikan in 1991. She received a 60-year sentence with 25 suspended. It will be her last performance. Hillbush has been granted parole early next year. The parole board could have chosen to release me at that moment. And I was actually hoping they would release me before the concert because the closing piece with my friends has become that who have become a family for me, said Hillbush. Patty Crowfoot, the director of the Anchorage-based Arts on the Edge, founded the orchestra 9 years ago at the suggestion of a friend who was an educational coordinator at the prison. Crowfoot said that she took up the cello as an adult and played at her son's school orchestra in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. She ran out of orchestras and told a friend who suggested that she start an orchestra at the prison. Crowfoot said there were some rocky days getting the orchestra started, including a revolving door of prisoners at the program. So only people with long sentences were allowed in. So the rules have been established, allowing women with long prison sentences to become members since it takes a long time to learn how to play a stringed instrument. Orchestra members also have to have been working with a rehabilitative program in the prison, promise to practice and take part in an annual concert, which is a fundraiser to help sustain the orchestra. The orchestra has grown from 8 to 30 members, divided into 3 separate groups: beginners, intermediates, and advanced. Later on, Crowfoot says they play at a high school orchestra level. Conductor Gabrielle Whitfield also said that an Anchorage public school teacher, she is an Anchorage public school teacher, she said that the practices at the prison are the highlight of her week. They just always say the greater a person's sadness in life, the greater their capacity for joy. I totally find that to be true here in the prison. For the prisoners, the hour-long Saturday orchestra practice gives them a break in their highly structured prison routine. Hilbush says she's so productive in that hour, she tells people not to visit her on Saturdays. The routine's always the same. You get up at the same time, everything is the same, and with music, it's going to be different. It's going to be challenging, says Kaufman, who was convicted in 1997 of selling marijuana and the murder of homeowner in Willow. Although she didn't enter the house, the jury found that she was the leader of people who did. So music gave her something to focus on besides being unhappy and walking around like a robot. So much of the time in jail, your life is really compartmentalized and very structured. And you have to wear a certain thing and follow a strict schedule. And the orchestra is like, well, I'm a musician. And music is a certain kind of freedom. To be able to make music and make music with your friends. So it's really a sense of being free, said Whitefield. Whenever anyone outside of the prison shows any positive interest in the inmates, Kaufman said it helps the women's self-esteem. Sometimes you feel like you don't matter because you know you've done something wrong and this is your punishment. And you don't really deserve to be recognized. So when people do, it's surprising. It feels really good, said Kaufman, who now works for an accountant and taking classes. That's a huge transformation in a person's life because they want to keep doing that, she said. In mid-October, the maximum security prison outside of Kingston, Ontario, will be giving another concert. So this is another Back to Canada story. The violinist is concertmaster from the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, and he's played acclaimed concerts in Russia. So this is another way. He says, this is my way of giving back to a community that will one day be free. So this is all over Canada and the United States, this idea of music being prison reform, and then this is in practice, like seeing that it does work in the case of Sarah, who has been released from prison and now goes back to contribute back to the community that helped her in the first place. I think this is really beautiful, seeing it in practice and seeing how it helped Sarah and various other inmates who are also being released soon. I think it's really beautiful to see that the prisoners, once they are released, are going back to help other inmates have the same sort of recovery as them. So I hope you guys really enjoyed these segments on the prison reform and music being part of therapy and rehabilitation for people that have fallen on hard times and committed crimes in the past and made huge mistakes in their past that they have been able to correct thanks to the correctional facilities that they were part of, and been able to rehabilitate and move forward and create a life for themselves that they wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. I think that this is a very, very beautiful story, and I was so glad to have heard it. So I hope that you guys have liked it as well. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about the Super Bowl and the green initiatives that the Super Bowl stadium, Miami's Hard Rock Stadium, has made to keep these sorts of things green. And we're going to talk about that when we come back.
Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you.
Welcome back from the break. So when we left, we had a lot of discussions about prison reform and music being an aid to help rehabilitate. So now the Super Bowl is happening today when the pod is released. I'm recording on Saturday, but today will be the day that you are listening to it, will be the day of the Super Bowl, where approximately 70,000 people are expected to attend at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens. The 54th Super Bowl where the San Francisco 49ers will take on the Kansas City Chiefs in the biggest sporting event of the year. I'm sure you're all gearing up for it. I know I am. I'm absolutely thrilled. Can't wait for it. And this is a very exciting story for me because I'm very environmentally conscious and I love sporting events and I love going, and I always think about how much waste there is at these huge sporting events. So this story was very exciting for me to hear about the incredible things that this stadium is doing. So the big game, obviously, could equate a lot of trash, but the NFL has a sustainability plan. It's very important for us to make sure that we're leading on the charge of sustainability, and we certainly are doing that at our most premium event, says Nikki Ewell, Director of Events for the NFL. Hard Rock Stadium became the first stadium in the NFL to start using 20-ounce sustainable, reusable aluminum cups made by the Ball Corporation, where the Miami Dolphins played in the Cincinnati Bengals on December 22nd. Hard Rock Stadium is going to be replacing all of its plastic cups with 50,000 aluminum ones that are easier to recycle. Fans will also be able to purchase water in cans instead of in plastic bottles, as cans are easier to recycle. John A. Hayes, chairman of the Ball, the company behind aluminum cups, said, "We developed the aluminum cup to ensure it meets growing demand for more green products. And we're excited that our partnership will give this year's Super Bowl fans the opportunity to do better by the environment." The NFL called this the larger green initiative happening at the Super Bowl for almost 25 years. The stadium plans to eliminate, wait for it, 99.4% of all single-use plastics in the year 2020. Plant-based utensils are also being used on all stadium suites and premium areas. So that is incredible. If you haven't used the plant-based utensils before, they're pretty interesting. They actually work very well. And I believe that they're made from a corn-based material. They work quite well. They're very cool. I think that you can, I might be mistaken on this. I haven't fully fact-checked this, but I do believe that you can eat them. I don't recommend that, but I do think that it is actually that purely plant-based. Additionally, straws will not be used at the Super Bowl, and any plastic will be corn-based. Yes, okay, that breaks down. There's also a robust recycling plan. and all Super Bowl barricade covers and graphics will be transformed. So any waste from the day will be going to a recycling center, compost facility, or a plant will be burned for energy, the National Geographic reported. They'll make them into purses, shower curtains, and all those things so that nothing at all ends up in a landfill, it well said. The NFL's Green Initiative also incorporates the food sold on the day. So anything that's excess that is not sold will be going to shelters and soup kitchens and donated to local charities that feed people in need. It's pretty incredible. The initiative, they said, will continue in the stadium after the Super Bowl. So that's great news. It's not just for today. It's going to be continuing all throughout 2020 and hopefully beyond. According to Centerplate, the stadium's food and beverage partner, there will be a small amount of plastic used for souvenir items, such as ice cream containers in the shape of a mini football helmet. But that should be it. So I was looking into this more and into how this benefits the environment. Obviously, this is huge for the environment, and we're all very, very, very happy about that, as we do need to instate sustainability as much as possible. But it's not even just good news for the environment. If you're listening and you're not sold on the environmental angle, here is the business news side of it. This is from Forbes magazine. Sustainability isn't just about recycling or fair trade practices, as important as they are. It touches every part of a company, from its supply chain operations to its talent practices, to its physical workplace itself. In 2020 and the years beyond, the shift to sustainable business will take shape in several major transformational ways. To start making right moves before it's too late, business models need to move from an out-of-sight, out-of-mind production model to being accountable for their whole end-to-end supply chain. This means no longer simply making shampoo and shipping it out in a plastic bottle, but being responsible for where that bottle ends up and how it gets there. In 2020, we are likely to see at least one major global CPG strike up a deal with retailers for refill stations, where consumers can get discounts on their shampoo by taking the old bottles back to be refilled, drastically cutting plastic waste and reducing carbon emissions. But circularity is not only about returns. Big companies will be taking responsibility for the front end of their supply chains too, with ethical sourcing and provenance of product is also part of the puzzle. So circularity might sound a little wishy-washy to those who don't see its impact, but within the next year, we will see how all of the above starts to take shape in some of the world's biggest businesses. For the C-suite, 2020 should be the year that sustainability is brought out from the darkness and into the light. So the sustainability argument really will improve the world, and it really does improve businesses as well. So it's not just about the environment. It will help your business. So it helps everyone, really. So it's really incredible. It's great news for the Super Bowl, and now I can relax and enjoy the Super Bowl and just have a great time. And I'm not going to tell you who I'm cheering for because I don't want you to know. When we return, I'm going to talk about my 5 favorite stories of the week. So have a good break. We'll talk about that when we return.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. So when we left off, we were talking about sustainability, specifically with the Super Bowl. And now I'm going to talk about some of my favorite quick news stories that I loved this week. So ones that I didn't want to make a full segment out of, but I wanted to mention to you. So number 5, a family of a baby taking his first steps in 1994 on a VHS tape was purchased at Goodwill and returned back to the parents that lost it all those years ago. So an Austin man purchased this thing at Goodwill and wanted to track down the family featured in the tape with the help from the internet. He did. Jim McKay said he found Tyree Alexander, the baby in the video, taking his first steps in a video that was shared thousands of times on social media. According to a Facebook post, he said, "Oh my God, Tyree just called me. We freaking found him, y'all." McKay bought a VCR at Goodwill at Lake Creek Parkway, and it used it just as a film prop for a film project he was working on. It was big. It was big. I watched the whole thing. It was just 18 minutes of glorious family time, and it was amazing. It was such a cool, beautiful moment that I had to do something with it. Something I couldn't just say that this is amazing, stick it in a box and forget about it. These people are young enough to still be alive. Maybe they'd like to see it. The video player sat around in his house for a couple of months before he even turned it on. But on Saturday, he switched it on, and inside he found a VHS tape documenting the baby's first steps. It was different back then, said McKay. People didn't film everything like they do now. It was only reserved for special occasions. So people filmed different things, and they did it differently, and some weren't good at it. It was just very real. It had this certain quality that you don't really get now. The date on the tape was September 27th, 1994. It's a very important moment to see the child's life, and it'll never happen again. I want to see that return. I just fell in love with his family. I think they're amazing, and if I can help them out and bring it back to them, that'd be like the perfect closure, he said. So Tyree Alexander said he'd never seen it before, but he was quick to be on the phone with McKay about it. It was the best part, just to hear how excited he was to be able to share the memory, that moment with the family, and for the first time, it's a treasure. Very happy for Tyree and his family who found that. That's pretty incredible. Number 4, a woman sees a long-lost dog photo on her beer can. We talked about this story before in Bradenton, Florida. Motorworks Brewing Company came up with this great idea to spread the word about adoptable dogs. They posted pictures of shelter pups on beer cans. And I'm happy to report that in one case, one of the dogs pictured is going to her forever home, but she hasn't been adopted. She was found at the Manatee County Hospital with a microchip, but her contact information was out of date. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't find her family. However, Monica Matthews went online and saw the dog that she lost 3 years ago featured on a beer can. I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, that's my dog. The dog's name is Hazel, went missing when she lived in Iowa. I really thought that she was gone. I never thought I would see her again. I had doubt, but I was like, oh no, it looks like her. Could it really be her? So she contacted and was able to get her dog back. Pretty incredible stuff to see. So her advice with the microchipping, keep track of exactly what company you use. Make sure stuff gets updated, especially if your pet goes missing. Don't give up. This is a very exciting news. I was really excited to see this because of the news story that we did a couple of episodes back where we were talking about this beer can initiative. And I was very excited to see that it not only is it giving people dogs and dogs forever homes, but it is reuniting lost dogs with their owners. So this is very cool, very exciting. And yeah, update those microchips, guys. And never give up. Never give up. Number 3, a woman sells cupcakes to pay for her beloved dog's chemotherapy. In a desperate bid to raise funds, a woman from northwestern Mexico has been baking to raise funds for her dog's chemotherapy. She realized he had lumps all over his body. Martinez Mecaz, the woman in question, and she had adopted the dog only weeks ago, but just loved it immediately, and knew that she had to do something for the dog when she brought it into the vet to see the biopsy and discover that it would, in fact, need some chemotherapy. So she's a young mother, and she has cooked over 200 cupcakes to sell in the street. She hopes to sell them next week, according to local media. And she has Max the dog helping out by holding a little billboard around his neck to advertise sales. So that's pretty beautiful and sweet. Number 2, an act of kindness by a group of Bellevue students moved their teacher to tears, and it's gone viral. 2 weeks ago, the teacher, Trey Payne, had an expensive pair of basketball shoes stolen from his classroom. The students were very upset by what happened, pulled their money together, and bought him a new pair of shoes. In the video, he opens it up and says, "I hope this isn't shoes, guys. Oh my, are you serious?" And he takes his glasses off and he starts to cry, and the students go in for a group hug. He's helped when other teachers would not give up on me. He's so kind to everyone. He's super nice. He always makes class enjoyable and treats everyone with respect. How beautiful and sweet is that? And number 1, U.S. life expectancy has risen for the first time in years. This is very exciting news. Deaths from drug overdoses declined, and overall life expectancy improved by 0.1 years to 78 years and 7 months. So this is very exciting. We're on the up and up. So that's pretty cool, very exciting, and I think some really incredible news. And I hope that you think that as well. So yeah, that's the wrap up. That's my week for you. That's it for my good news. Happy Super Bowl. And thanks for listening. There is beauty in America, so let's try harder to see it. Thank you for listening to the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review and rate the episode. It really helps us. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much, and have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news and even weird news. The GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.